Hello, and welcome to this episode of Clarity, the Undistorted Truth About Dementia. Today, we're going to talk about emotions and memory and why emotions are important in caregiving. This is a topic that sometimes is a little bit tricky for people to wrap their head around, so hopefully, we're going to give some insight today. And as always, if this sparks any questions for you, or if there's something you're struggling with, even if it's unrelated to this topic, but something you're struggling with in a caregiving scenario, please be sure to email in. We would love to answer your questions on the air. So you can email those questions to dementiaundistorted@gmail.com. So let's dive into emotions and memory. So there is a lot to be said about emotions, but we're going to try to keep this brief just for accessibility and because you probably don't have all the time in the world to listen to a video like this. So whatever we aren't able to cover today, we're going to try to cover in another video. So emotions, where they get tricky is as a caregiver, it's very common to try to compartmentalize your own emotions, to try to focus on the task at hand, and to try to do that unemotionally, kind of as a tool of self preservation. And I'm not going to say that that's right or wrong. We're going to talk later about, in another video, about healthy coping as a caregiver. But it's very common for people to feel like they're trying to remove themselves emotionally so that things are less hurtful or difficult or draining for themselves. And that's, like I said, it's very common. It's a normal thing, I would even say, to do. Where that makes caregiving a challenge sometimes is when you're trying to consciously shut down your own emotions. You're not always paying attention to the emotions of the person you're caring for. And the reason it's important to pay attention to those things, aside from that, we are trying to be loving and bring joy and happiness to a person. That really is a goal that we have when we're caring for a person. Why would we want to care for someone to make them miserable? We want to make them happy. But when we're caring for someone, if we're not paying attention to their emotions, it can be easy to forget that emotions are what linger when memory fails. So I'm going to say this another way, in that emotions last longer in the memory of someone who has dementia than the facts of an event. So this means that whatever interaction you're having with someone, be it positive or negative, be it necessary or something, supplemental, when everything else fades the next day, when they don't remember what transpired between you, they just remember the emotion. They remember whether or not they were happy. They remember whether or not they were scared. They remember whether or not they had a feeling of trust, whether or not they felt anxious. Those are the things that linger. And anxiety in particular is often a big battle when we're talking about dementia. And so we don't want to do anything that's going to fuel anxiety because that can just be a beast. So let's talk about memory and emotion and kind of how that works. So this is something that what I just said about emotions lasting longer is something you probably know already, whether you realize it or not. So let's talk about this in a non-caregiving sense. Let's say you were at work or school and you studied really hard and you gave a presentation in front of a group of people. And after that presentation, someone walked up to you and said, "I really liked what you had to say. Maybe we should sit down and talk about it sometime." That feels really good. And that might give you a good feeling for a while, maybe the whole rest of the day, maybe not. Maybe something that when you think back on it, you have a fond memory, and you get that emotional boost. And it fades away. Now let's think about that same scenario, and someone walks up to you afterwards and says, "I really didn't like what you had to say. Maybe we could sit down and talk about it sometime." How does that feel? that's a feeling that's going to follow you. That's a feeling that's going to ruin the rest of your day and maybe the next couple days. That's something you're going to remember the next time you get up to speak in front of somebody. So that's an emotion that has lingered in your memory longer than the details of what took place. You might remember all of those details, being someone who is a full cognitive capacity, but even so, you might not remember every single thing that was said. You might not remember every single point that was made, but you remember how you felt. I have one of my favorite quotes, I have this on my wall, is a quote from Maya Angelou. And she says that people will forget what you did and people will forget what you said, but they will never forget the way you made them feel. And that really is the golden rule when it comes to dementia care. Sometimes it's easy to think about caring for someone with dementia like, well, if I did it wrong today, I get a fresh start tomorrow. It's really easy to kind of fall into that mentality. I'm going to encourage you not to, because emotion builds and the memory surrounding emotion builds. And we want to build that foundation and this beautiful framework of trust and joy and happiness and positive interactions so that the tasks that are more delicate, that are more difficult to complete, can be done easier and more thoroughly because that person has that foundation of positive emotions and that they understand that you're not there to hurt them. This is something I say to, especially to new caregivers all the time, and I'm just going to warn you that this might make people feel uncomfortable. And I'll be honest, I say it to make people feel uncomfortable sometimes. But I say this especially when we're teaching people about giving personal care or giving a shower or having to get someone dressed, help them in the bathroom, those kinds of things. I say it's not common in your adult life, especially, for a stranger to walk into your bedroom and take your clothes off. But that's how it feels to be a person who is receiving care often, especially if it's a caregiver who is outside of their family, or if they're advanced enough that they don't recognize people as their family. And because that's the feeling that is natural, that's why it's so important to have such a strong, solid base of trust and respect and understanding, and these emotions that linger to be ones that are not feelings of fear, feelings of suspicion. If you watched our video about reality orientation, we talked about feelings of fear and suspicion a lot in that. And that's what we want to avoid. So that is why, at its core, this is important. We can watch people's behavior, and the reason I encourage you to watch someone's behavior, especially in someone who's more advanced in their disease process, someone who's in early stages that can still communicate decently well what they're thinking and what they're feeling. It might not always be spot on all of the time, but that's a person that you can pay attention to what they're saying, and I would encourage you to also watch the way they behave. But particularly in people who are more advanced in their process, you can always watch their behavior, because another thing I like to say to people is it's important what they say to you, but you also have to look for what they're trying to say to you. Not everybody communicates the way that they're feeling verbally all the time. Some people, it's very difficult for them to verbally communicate how they feel, even despite their disease process. Even if that wasn't in the picture, it would be difficult for them to communicate their feelings. And so sometimes we can watch people's behavior and we can ascertain, do they look like they feel guarded? How is their facial expression, their affect? How how open and loving are they to someone? Are they misinterpreting the situation based on their body language? These are all things that are important to pay attention to, because then that helps you to understand what emotions might be at play. We don't pretend to be able to read people's minds. There's not a magic trick for that. If we could look into the brain of someone who has dementia and understand everything that they're thinking and feeling, this job would be a piece of cake. And it's not. So these are the tools that we need to put in our tool belt so that we can pull them out as we need them to help us approach this situation as best we possibly can. While we're watching people's behavior, I'm going to give one little caveat. So you want to watch for a response that seems typical in a normal functioning person. So if you tell someone a joke that's worthy of a chuckle, they chuckle, or they laugh, or maybe they don't laugh, but they don't find it funny, but they have that response that you would see in anyone. Sometimes we see people uncontrollably laugh, or it might make them uncontrollably cry, or both. They swing between the two. And I use the joke as an example just because that's something that's meant to bring out a emotion or an emotional response. It could be any number of scenarios. There is a specific condition, which I've seen typically in people who are more advanced, and not everybody gets this condition, that's called pseudobulbar affect. And you may have heard of this before. If you haven't, that's okay. It's not super ridiculously common, but some people, because we're talking about their brain not firing correctly, sometimes people get this where it can be really easy to mistake the situation as somebody being very, very happy or very, very sad. But if this seems like, wow, I didn't think that they would find this that funny, I can't believe they're still laughing, that kind of situation, especially if it happens more than a few times, then that might be something to clue your doctor into to see if there's other things at play going on in their brain, or it might be an indicator that their brain is changing. So I just want to throw that out there, because we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that while we talk about emotions. But let's get back to talking about a person that we're caring for, and making sure that we're fostering those emotions. So I am very much a person who believes that it's more important how things are than how I feel about things. And that's my personality. And I think that has made me an effective caregiver, but I have to check myself, because I know I can just push it aside and deal with it later. I have to remind myself that not everybody can do that, and it's okay to be tender and to be vulnerable and to have some emotion shared with a person, especially a person that we're caring for. That doesn't mean if I'm having a bad day, I go to a person who is cognitively compromised and cry on their shoulder. I don't do that. But it's okay to say things like, I know you might feel scared. I felt that way too, but I'm going to help you. We are the ones who are able to verbalize our thought process and verbalize our emotions and say exactly what we mean to say when this person we're caring for is not able to. So sometimes us putting words to those feelings helps frame things for them, so it sets them up to have that feeling. When someone is having a good day, and we rejoice in that with them, it helps reinforce that. When someone is having a hard time, it's okay to say, it seems like you're really stressed today. How can I help? We talked about this also in the reality orientation video about communicating that we care about people's problems, that their problems are our problems, and that we're their partner in that. That we aren't here to challenge them, we're here to help them, that we're on their side. And that's something we want to keep in mind while we're mulling over this idea about emotions and memory. The last thing I'm going to say about this, because we've taken up enough time for today, and I want you to come back, and so I don't want to make these too long. The last thing we're going to say is to remember that we can know all of these things about emotions, about reality orientation, about the progress of a disease process. We can know all of these things. That doesn't mean that we just become a perfect caregiver overnight. So these are things that you need to be able to digest and think about and practice. I've been a caregiver for people who are cognitively impaired my entire adult life, and I do not do it perfectly. I have to tell myself these things. I need to remember these things. I need to repeat these things often, because it's with practice that we become better and better. We never actually become perfect. If there was a way to achieve perfection, everybody would copy that person and do that model of how to achieve perfection in caregiving. But with practice, we become more perfect. We improve, we become better. And that's our goal, is to constantly be striving to be better for this person that we love. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today. Please come back. We're putting up videos all the time. And be sure to email us your questions, and we'll put that email address in writing after this so you can see it as well. But for your reference, it is dementiaundistorted@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.